so much pressure when there's a camera pointing at your face.
What's the saboteur there?
Really, really good point. What is the saboteur there?
I think we're live. Yeah, so happy to be here with you, and we'll talk about our minds and how they can be friend or enemy. And the background is that AK, David, and Ian, who will come in a couple minutes, we hope. Oh, there he is. Hi, Ian.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Good to see you guys.
I was just telling everyone that we've been on a journey on positive intelligence together for the last 7 weeks or so. And we've been deep diving into our own minds and the voices in our mind, and wanted to share some of those experiences and stories because we found them very valuable for ourselves, and also thought it might be valuable for everyone else to hear.
Yeah, super excited to be here in this conversation with you guys and to share it with all the folks tuning in.
Yeah, great. So I thought maybe we can just do a little intro of each of every one of us, and so that folks know who we are, and then we can start the conversation.
Cool. Where should we start?
I'm happy to kick it off since I was the late comer by 30 seconds to the meeting, drawing attention to myself and what have you. So my name is Ian Maxwell. I'm a personal freedom coach, and my background is wild and varied, but I'm a musician by trade. Spent many years working in the recruiting industry, but nowadays I help people with creating wild and crazy plans in their lives. So I've spent the last couple of years being a digital nomad and working on my financial independence journey. So I work with a lot of folks who are looking to create that self-employed lifestyle or going through career transitions. So that's another area that I've been in. Fun fact about me, I've lived in 3 different countries over the last year, and I was totally homeschooled growing up. So I had a very strange and unusual upbringing. But all in all, I mean, I've had an incredible time working with this incredible group of coaches here, and that's really been an important part of my personal journey. So I'm excited to share the stage and kind of be in this conversation.
Thanks, Ian.
Cool. I'll go next then. So I'm AK. That's short for Achillea Kyriakou. It can be a bit of a tongue twister. And yeah, in 2021, I left my corporate job. I was in marketing for best part of 13, 14 years. And I left it after experiencing some mental and physical health issues. And that actually led me to then start my property business with my fiance, which then allowed me to then go into mental fitness coaching and start to help people more with their sort of limiting beliefs, their confidence, and everything that really was a roadblock for myself as well. I've been on that journey a few years now. I'm really enjoying it. Comes with its struggles, and we're going to talk about some of those struggles as well, probably over the course of this live session as well.
David, do you want to chime in?
Sure. I'm David Westerland. I'm located in Bellingham, Washington, near Seattle and Vancouver, Canada. And I'm delighted to be here. It's been a wonderful 8-week learning journey with my colleagues here on what we call positive intelligence. And we'll get into that. It's nothing we coined as a term, but we'll tell you about that background. And so I'm a leadership coach. And before I got into coaching, I was mainly and still am working with organizations and leaders around who do they need to be and become in order to do what they want to do. And working with a lot of leaders who are managing so many different stakeholders and trying to manage all kinds of things, right? Their own well-being and the productivity of their team and keep good staff. And so I love learning so much. And when this opportunity came up and Alisa told me about it, I was like, here's another thing. And at first I'm thinking, do I really want to take on another learning thing? And maybe some of you listening know that experience. But in this case, I'm so glad I did, because it's really integrated into lots of other things in my life. So, Lisa.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I can relate to that. I think a lot of people maybe that listen, but especially coaches, are a little addicted to learning more and signing up for programs. But I had such fun with you guys and also learned so much. And for me, it was really valuable because this program of positive intelligence brings together so many different areas that I've been working in before. So my background is in psychology. I'm a psychologist and a coach as well, and a mindfulness teacher. And the positive intelligence program basically brings together these streams of positive psychology, neuroscience, mindfulness into a very, very applicable, accessible program in language. And we'll talk about that. I've been sort of looking for my path my whole life. And I guess I never really quite, I tried a lot of different things. I worked in science and marketing. I also worked as a bouncer and a flight attendant. So
at the same time?
At the same time? I was going to ask the same question.
Well, no. Well, part of it. Yeah. Part of it was also at the same time. But yeah, I guess, a couple of years ago, I then found my own coaching company, and now that's basically what I'm doing, helping other people to sort of find their path, because I never really felt I really fit in, and I had this feeling, okay, I just have to adapt or accept that that's just how it is, and no, it turns out I don't have to. It turns out that I can actually, forge my own path, and that's one of the big things that I help clients to do as well. Let's jump in and maybe talk a little bit about how we can help people to not let their minds be their worst enemy.
So I'll share one thought that came to me that went around this idea of how do we keep our minds from being our worst enemy. And it's the recognition of the fact that a lot of times the patterns of thought that have us be anxious, have us be avoidant, experience mental or emotional pain, which turns into physical pain. One of the things that makes it really hard to let go of those things is that a lot of times it seems like our greatest strengths.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is, those patterns are your greatest strengths at the time. So that can make letting go of it really challenging. Like, why would I want to let go of this? I'll share a personal example, and I'd certainly love to hear from each of you too, because we've all got a version of this. But one of my strengths is I'm a person who sees possibility in things. I encounter a new idea, a new project, and I'm like, that's incredible, and it's possible. And how do I tie it to the 7 other things I've got going on? And that's something that makes me me. But the way it shows up for me, that can be challenging, is I feel like I'm constantly busy. I'm getting pulled from one thing to the other thing to the other. And when one project gets a little confronting, I'll procrastinate by doing something else on my project plate, and I'll have a very busy day and get nothing done. That example I shared within this framework is what we call like a restless saboteur. That's my number one I've got. So I invite that as an idea to kind of kick around, is like, how do our greatest strengths end up being our weaknesses, and how do we reclaim that power? So we're just coming from that very pure place of what actually does make us brilliant in the world.
Yeah, I'll go off that, Ian. And I want to state too, this course that we got the privilege to be a part of is called Positive Intelligence, or PQ. And can we put something in the chat for people to see, like a link at positiveintelligence.com? And the founder of it is a guy named Shirzad Sharmin. Am I pronouncing his name right? I think so. He's taught at Stanford and worked with some Fortune 100 leaders. And basically, we have in his theory, which, as Alisa said, combines a bunch of things together: neuroscience, positive intelligence, etc. We have these saboteurs, and our master saboteur is our judge. Okay. We judge others, we judge ourselves, and we judge our circumstances. This happened. Oh no, my day is ruined. I heard something recently. Are you having a bad day? Or are you having bad 5 minutes? Right? Because we can have a bad 5 minutes, but then extrapolate, oh, my day is just totally shot. Right. Or even judge the weather, which I guess is a circumstances under that. Oh, it's miserable outside, therefore, blah, blah, blah. Right. So there's that master saboteur, and then there's 9 other sub-saboteurs, and we do little self-assessments to figure that out. So there's saboteurs, and then we have our sage and our sage powers. So the goal of this positive intelligence, I don't know if I'm getting the whole thing encompassing here, but is to become aware of the saboteurs and weaken them, and to become aware of our sage powers and strengthen them. And then there's this other thing that was actually introduced before that, this idea of self-command. And really, the way I would put it, it's about getting mindful in the moment and tuning into our senses. Because there's this one that Shirzad does where we tune into our tactile sensations. And he says, feel the fingertip ridges on your fingers, just touch them. Because usually, at least for me, and I think most people, when we're anxious, I am future tripping or I'm thinking about the past.
Yeah.
But when we come into the present moment through different things, that's part of the antidote. And so how can one of the powerful things, and the last thing I'll share for now, is doing these, as he calls PQ reps, throughout our day, not just in the morning, not just at the end of the day, but like 6 times a day, and the power of that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, David. And maybe just one more thing about what you shared is that basically we're wired to survive and not to thrive, right? And so all this judging, the saboteurs, all this anxiety is basically there to keep us safe. But in our current environment, it's not making us happy. And it's also not really helping us do the things that we want to do and achieve. And so, like you shared, we can get out of this mental control tower loop of anxiety or whatever our saboteur might be by just sort of focusing on our senses, and that activates a different brain region, which is sort of what Shirzad refers to the sage, and we've just experienced how powerful it can be by just focusing 2 minutes on your senses multiple times a day. So it's not like an hour meditation every day, like really these bite-sized chunks that make it so actionable.
Yeah, I think as well, like one of the really cool things was the way they're characters inside your own mind, and that allows it to be a lot more visual as well. And going back to what Ian was saying, I think my top one, I know my top one is hyper rational. So these thoughts of the rational mind is exactly where it's at. So like Ian was referring to, it's that sort of, you think it's your biggest strength. Feelings are distracting, feelings are irrelevant, everyone is so irrational, everybody else is wrong, and it leads to these feelings of feeling frustrated with others that maybe are showing emotion or maybe are not rational enough, and it can lead to feelings of being very anxious about preserving personal time, preserving energy, being super efficient. It's just, there's no other thing outside this. And I think that the biggest kind of like awareness, or the biggest sort of like thing I learned was that, wow, for so long I believed this was like my superpower, and on one part it has been a great help and it's done a lot of good, but equally I wasn't aware of the negative side to it, and the sort of justification or the lies that this particular character kind of sold me, as it were. So yeah, it's a really interesting one.
Yeah, and I think the fact that we can actually picture these characters helps a lot to just identify and actually see them. And also that's why in our subtitle we said, I don't actually have it right now, but we said something about the comedy and the joy and the horror, because like it can be, when we're so identified with them and believe them, then it's really like it can be really, really tough. You know, like maybe I think we all know when we judge ourselves, for example, really harshly, and that takes different forms, and we just believe that we're bad and that we're not good enough and all these things. And then when we actually see them, it can also, they can almost be really funny, like the things they say, and you know, when we even anticipate what they say, and it's almost like a yeah, I mean, throughout the course we had these like inside jokes of imagining, okay, our saboteurs meet and they go into a bar, so what would they say, and had a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, there's a few thoughts, but I'll respond to the first thing coming to mind, Alisa. Just, there was such a joy for me, and I think we all shared this, of this learning journey together. And so I want to like shout out to Shirzad for how he designed this course. And for those of you listening who design courses, the fact that there was some asynchronous listening, right, that we did on our own, and yet it was a requirement, if I'm not mistaken, to have a pod. So, and for me as a social person and a social learner, this was huge, right? So we had a WhatsApp thread going where we were sending voice messages. So I'd go out for my morning walk and listen to the messages that came from Europe the night before, you know, as I was sleeping, from you all. And it was so good to then also have a space to share what I was thinking about. And sure, I have friends to share what I was thinking about, but you're the only ones who knew about PQ, save this one other person who I do happen to know of, but not in a regular conversation with that person. So that was just such a benefit. And again, to help us have some levity around it. Because I don't know about you all or people listening, but when I'm in my own head about these things, that judge, I mean, one of the things we talked about is how these saboteurs work together too. So we all have this master saboteur. I might have said that. That's what Shirzad says. We all have this judge saboteur, and then there's these 9 others. So my top 3 are restless, avoider, and pleaser. And so sometimes if I'm avoiding something, then I might judge myself for that. And then but anyways, they interact in interesting ways. And it's good to, I mean, I believe this is true, and I tell clients this. How do we bring a seriousness to life and work and bring levity? I feel like sometimes we don't take things seriously enough, and we don't have enough levity. Yeah.
What you brought up there, David, makes me smile as a coach, because I've noticed that most of the good stuff when it comes to personal development lives in the paradoxes. You know,
Nice.
It's somehow we don't take certain things seriously enough, but we take ourselves way too seriously. What's going on there? You know, I feel like I want to create more time in my life, and I never have enough time. I never have enough time. I never have enough time to get everything done. And yet time slips by more and more quickly, the less time you feel like you have in the first place. And okay, what's up with that? The other thing that I kind of got present to as you were sharing that is this idea that when we're operating, I mean, this program calls it like the saboteur place. Another way to think of it for the sciencey folks out there is when we're operating in fight or flight. Very simply, you know, when we're in a place of autonomic nervous system arousal, that lives in kind of like our limbic brain and our amygdala. And that's a very, very old part of our brain that, to Elisa's point, is designed to keep us alive. Okay, great. Thank you to that. But when we're operating from that place of fight or flight, that's expensive, metabolically, spiritually, emotionally.
Mm.
If you're listening out there, I'd invite you to just take a moment to be quiet and think for a moment. How much time during my day do I spend in some kind of fight or flight mode? Time where I'm sitting there feeling anxious or thinking about a conversation, a meeting that I have. You're in fight or flight. When you're feeling frustrated with yourself, maybe frustrated with a coworker or with your spouse, you're in some kind of fight or flight mode. Whatever example came up for you, where you're experiencing that tension or that pressure or anxiety, that's your fight or flight system activating. Within this framework, we call it a saboteur hijacking. Now I'd invite you to ask yourself, what is that costing me? Really? In terms of my happiness, in terms of my relationships, just in terms of my energy.
Mm.
The truth is, you don't have to let go of anything that makes you special. That's the opposite of the goal. Anything that makes you you. But the goal in terms of self-actualization, and a big part of what we learn together in this program, is that you can have access to those things without being stuck in fight or flight mode, without letting your amygdala grab it and say, all right, let me give you an adrenaline boost and yeah, run the show. But I'd love to, kind of put that question out to the rest of our group here. What are some of the ways you've found to be most effective in taking these things that make you you and shifting out of like a saboteur-based or fight or flight sort of response and into something that's actually more energized or doesn't have you paying that same price to get to a better result?
Yeah, thank you for that beautiful reflection. I think that's spot on and very enlightening. And I think for me personally, one really important thing that just popped up as you were going through the reflection was that even the word saboteur is a little bit problematic for me because it has this like quality of bad, so it activates the judge, and when it does that, when it brings up the resistance, then I'm actually more in this fight and flight response, right, like I'm kind of fueling it. And so for me the first step is to really not to just acknowledge it and not make it bad, just sort of see it. And there the comedy is really helpful. Just see it as a character and maybe even thank it, or for keeping you safe. And also the fact that I can't really, when I'm in fight or flight, I can't think my way out of it. And that's why it's so helpful to focus on completely switch and focus on my senses. And touch for me is like the most powerful.
Yeah. Thanks, Alisa. And as you were sharing and as you were doing that meditation for us, Ian, made me think about one of the sage powers that we were introduced to first is empathy. So maybe if you're listening, like you think about these different things and these patterns, and sometimes it's so natural that we judge ourselves. We're like, I've got this pattern that happens over and over, and how do I get out of it, right? Or how do I have a different relationship with it? Might be another way to put it. And one of the things that Shirzad says was in his work with leaders, the thing that leaders are weakest in, these top leaders, is empathy. And then within that, self-empathy. And he said, think about it. In our culture and a lot of Western cultures, the push drive to be the best, there's often not room for empathy because there's this belief that if you have empathy, then you're just going to be soft on yourself and you're not going to get anything done. So he's like basically introduced the importance of challenging that lie that we won't get anything done unless we're pushed to the extreme. And if anyone has seen the film Whiplash, it's a great film about a jazz drummer who's at the top of his game, or he's learning, you know, a young jazz drummer. And the who's the actor who played the teacher? Simmons. And he's just pushing this kid. And the movie's the film's bringing up, is this the only way? Is this the only way for us to realize our potential? Yeah.
Such a good point. I think, you know what, that the point on empathy was like a game changer for me, because before I really sort of understood that, I was definitely my worst critic. Gave myself zero empathy, and I think one of the sort of experiences and the tasks he kind of gets us to go through is that, you know, the visualization of ourselves and others as children, and you know, looking at the pure essence of who we really are, and you know, it was like almost instant, like the moment I focused on myself as a child, or you know, and I visually saw that photo, or I thought about somebody else that I you know, I might have had zero sympathy for or empathy for, sorry. You know, the moment I thought of them as a child, like it was like the guard just instantly, there was like an instant drop of that, and you go out of this fight or flight mode that Ian's talking about, you know, and you move more towards like a human being, like so yeah, super interesting. And that term that he used as well in terms of like learning to surf kind of was along those lines as well. It's like, you know, a surfer understands how to kind of ride those waves. It's that sort of dropping of the guard. It's like, it's not fighting and pushing all the time. That's been massive for myself, definitely, because I'm very prone to that push as opposed to like just let it be, let it come, you know, because my top three: hyper rational as a character, controller as a character, stickler as a character, like these very, you know, more sort of aggressive style of characters. So yeah.
Yeah, and they show up in very different ways, right? I remember how Shirzad was sharing his judge, and it was very like really loud, aggressive, like quite strong. And that didn't really resonate. Like my judge isn't like that. My judge is very sneaky. It's just like constantly judging me, but with a nice voice. So I don't really, like, it's not as obvious. And he made us sort of embody our different saboteurs and also the judge. And that's quite helpful too, because then you have like a body marker, how your saboteur feels like. And by the way, like one of the very easy markers of when a saboteur is activated, according to Shirzad, is just negative emotions. So it's like a pretty easy thing to spot. And you can also use these body markers or this embodiment technique to shift. So, for example, one of the sage powers is also activate. And so you could even adjust sort of like how you sit or stand. Like activate has, like, for me, like a very upright sort of, it's a very different way. Like this would be, now I would be more an activate power. And again, it's like this bottom up approach where I'm not thinking my way there, but I'm sort of bringing my body in that position, and then I let the rest follow, because I'm an overthinker. I'm excellent at that. I'm also hyper rational and very up in there all the time. So for me, this bottom up is really powerful, because I definitely can think my way out of these things.
Can I just acknowledge the fact that you said, oh, for example, you can embody the posture, and all three of us were like,
good notice, Ian. That's so true. I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. I've been going like this.
Yeah, I mean, the mirror neurons are also activated. Your empathy. is there. So
Well,
Yeah, like one of the questions I love in one-on-one coaching and facilitation of groups is this: what would be made possible? What would be made possible if we had more empathy? And let's just even go for it and say self-empathy.
Mm.
Like, what might that unlock for us? Right? And maybe your brain people's brain might go to, well, it wouldn't do any good. But what if it did some amazing good? And it allowed those places that are maybe restless to settle, sort of like the sediment to settle. Yeah. Fun to think about.
Yeah, coming back to what Ian was sharing and his meditation or reflection, like what energy would be set free, like what forces would be set free, right? By not catching all this energy, not wasting all energy in this like constant loop of anxiety, stress mode.
So that brings up, sorry, Ian, go ahead.
Maybe we're going in the same place. So you can tell me whether our brain went the same spot. But I was going to be cheeky and be devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
Right? What if there was more empathy? What if I let up on myself? I'd probably just be lazy. I wouldn't get anything done if I kept cutting myself slack. And if I was cutting the other people on my team and in my life slack, they wouldn't get anything done either. So you know what? A little bit of tough love is good for me and it's good for them.
Sounds good to me, Ian. Go for it. New choice. In improv, we have this game, New Choice, where we can say something and then go, new choice. Yeah, no, that's good. Let's go down that road. I think one thing that came up for me as you were doing that, Ian, is we have certain ways of being and what we even call our personality that's so ingrained and in certain pathways, neural pathways and behavioral pathways, that I think one could say what you've said sometimes out of a fear of the unknown, of navigating. And I think, is that another sage power, navigate, right? To explore, to navigate. Maybe those are those two different ones, exploring and navigating? Yeah. Okay, maybe we'll put in the chat the 5 sage powers. But basically being curious. And one of the hard things about that is we have to become a learner and not know. And so it's somewhat of a tangent to what you were doing there, Ian, but that's what came up for me. Yeah.
And I brought up the devil's advocate point here because it's an important one. Because I think for a lot of people's lived experience, it's easy to agree with the idea of like, oh, more empathy would be a good thing in the abstract. But when it comes down to actually practicing it, there are so many things where I've talked to people where they'd be like, yeah, I totally agree with that, but here's the reason why it's different in my life, right? Or why it's different for me. And a lot of times that very argument of, well, if I didn't, keep myself on like this, or if I didn't keep, the people in my life's feet to the fire a little bit, then who knows what would happen? It might all fall apart.
Right. And that's the key question. Who knows what would happen? Actually, they do not know. We do not know if we've never experimented with it. So that's an invitation, I think, for experimentation. So I love saying anything worth doing is worth starting small. So I would wonder, like if I was coaching you, Ian, I might say, would you be willing to do a small experiment in empathy? Mm-hmm. And next time you're out at a restaurant, just wonder about the server or a customer who seems disgruntled. Just wonder about, I wonder where they're coming from in their story. I don't know. That's just what's coming to me in the moment. But yeah.
I think as well, like it's that detachment from these different characters and us as well helps. Like, tell me if I'm sort of going off on a tangent, but I feel like it's linked in that to your point there, Ian. It's like almost looking at it from like a bird's eye view to be like, well, yeah, is it good? Is it bad? I don't know. They're not me. They're like these characters, and some like it's. For example, let's take my hyper rational character. Like that's helped me do certain things, but it's also held me back in certain things. And I think it's like looking I mean, maybe this is being hyper rational, but I think it's kind of like looking at it from a sort of like a detached point of view. Like, it's not me, it's just like this character, and I need it for certain scenarios, but actually in certain scenarios it's not great.
Yeah, so when you say detached, I'm thinking about, I just heard a great if people have heard of Thomas Hubel, he has a podcast called Point of Relation, and he interviewed someone, I think his name is William Ury, who's a mediator who's done big time mediation like in Venezuela and I'm not sure all the other countries, but great interview. And William talks about being on the balcony, you know, and I've thought about this. We've talked about this before, but like, that's what I'm hearing, AK, when you say that, like being able to step back and go, oh, here's my saboteur at work, versus being subject to it. And we're not even aware of that happening, you know, just stepping back. Alisa?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, and that almost always includes the judge saboteurs as well, saboteur as well, if we're sort of messed up or merged with it. And I'm thinking of this Explorer Sage Power where he let us do this game of fascinated anthropologists, and that's basically describing that a little bit. So I'm sort of observing it without judgment or attachment. I mean, it's not so easy. It's easier said than done, but yeah, I think that's sort of what it describes.
Yeah. So I'm not sure what triggered this thought, but I want to speak to one of the pluses of this program too. Was not only this pod, but there's a great app that comes with it. And the way that it was done is the beginning of each day, there'd be a topic for the week. There'd be a focus of the day and just a 2.5-minute audio from Shirzad. And then about every 3 hours, there was like a time released audio. And then you could see at the top of the app, there was like a battery icon and another sort of dial. And you could see your battery go up and down during the day and your muscle growing over time. That one always went up. That was nice. But the whole point is, and to circle back into how we were talking about coming to our body and meditation, what we've talked about, the four of us, so we have some clients, and you listeners might resonate with this, who are just like anything related to mindfulness, they're just like, nah, I don't want to go there. They might be hyper rational people, maybe. But talking about doing reps, it's like going to the gym. We're sort of doing the same thing. We're coming into the present moment, but there's something that I like about talking about reps, because that metaphor works. Like we are building muscle. Yeah. So that was just another helpful part of the course. Yeah.
Yeah. I love viewing it. Personally, I love viewing it like that, because it's, you know, a lot of people think they should become fitter, healthier. You know, that's much more mainstream, you know, whereas this kind of mental fitness, or this, this, you know, positive intelligence, this kind of mental fitness side, doing reps like you would in the gym, you know, building that mindset, building that mental muscle is like, yeah, it's just not as I don't know, not as like normal for people, or not spoken about, or maybe just seen in different ways. So yeah, I think it's honestly, it's I love the way they position it like that.
Yeah. And I think it's so important these days, because there's this war of our attention everywhere. And I think learning how to direct our mind in a way that serves us is one of the most important things that we can train. And I think it sort of becomes a little bit more important collectively. Like it feels like there's more, you know, even mindfulness and meditation becomes a lot more mainstream these days. But I feel like this particular one is just so accessible, because you have these bite-sized things throughout the day, and you sort of recharge your batteries throughout the day. And yeah, it's really, accessible for everyone. I feel like it's very inclusive in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and talking about doing it throughout the day is making me think of someone named Richard Boyatzis, who's at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, and he's done longitudinal studies over the impact of coaching since the late 60s. So he's got a lot of data over time, and one of the things he talks about is the parasympathetic nervous system. So we've got our sympathetic active nervous system. Parasympathetic is like rest, restore, and we need both. We need to go between both. But he says, if you have an opportunity to take an hour-long walk, even walk in the woods, that's great. But what's more powerful is doing things throughout the day where we re-access that.
Mm-hmm.
And that totally aligns with what we've learned through positive intelligence, this throughout the day moments. I've been thinking, as I sometimes struggle with my sleep, which makes sense since I have a restless saboteur, right? That it's about me, sleep is an interesting thing because we can't force sleep. We allow it to happen. But a lot of what allows it to happen is me being able to wind down at the end of the day. So I think about how can I intentionally wind down, but then I also sort of, with levity and laugh at myself, think about, well, maybe if I didn't get so wound up during the day. And so by having these little breaks, I'm like coming back to myself, going out and coming back, going out and coming back.
Yeah. And it's so beautiful to create those moments. And just since I'm playing in this game, the game of devil's advocate for our audience here, I don't have time. 2 minutes? I'm back to back all day long, all day long, all day long. I don't have time.
You're reading my mind, Ian. I was just thinking about that sense that people are saying that. So it's great. So, what I might say to that is, well, I don't know how I'd say it. I was trying to say it with like a coaching thing, but this idea of, if we have meetings back to back, what is your ability to influence that 60-minute meeting becoming 50 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And creating that buffer. This won't happen by accident, right? There's so much inundation, flood of information in our world and demands on our time. Part of what has been so enlivening for me with this program is the sense of, it helps cultivate my sense of agency. And that we have to grow that muscle. And the hardest part is starting that journey. Once we can start creating some space, I think it gets easier.
Yeah. And I think to that point too, this whole thing of like, I just don't have time for that is another lie. We tell ourselves a lot of lies to keep ourselves safe from something, right? And the truth is, all of us have the same amount of time in the day. We all have 2 minutes. And the other beautiful thing is you don't even need 2 minutes. Because what we're talking about, again, stripping away a lot of the metaphor, going back to the biology of this, is if our saboteur, fear, fight, or flight response is happening in our amygdala limbic system, the actual muscle we're building is the muscle of shifting from this activation to the frontal cortex, or the medial prefrontal cortex specifically, which is where our self-directed behavior goes, where a lot of peace lives. And yes, there are a lot of other brain regions involved, but the muscle we're building is shifting from fight or flight into, maybe it connects to the parasympathetic thing, David. But actually, I'd be interested in learning more about that myself. But the beautiful part about this kind of practice is, sure, you have 2 minutes, but you can even do it in 10 seconds. You could even do it in the middle of a meeting. If I was finding myself getting a little lost in this conversation, I could pick something from one of my fellow coaches and just really notice something visually. Like, is that a hanging spider plant you got behind there, David? I love spider plants. And just taking a moment to appreciate the color and the shape of that. Or Alisa's sweater. Oh my God, that fabric looks so comfortable. Like, it looks like getting a hug. I'm just imagining, right? I didn't actually notice the texture of that fabric before. If you're in the middle of a meeting and you're back to back, you can create space to get grounded in your senses. And the effect of that is going to shock you about almost how immediately it takes you out of that place of a fight or flight reaction or a saboteur hijacking into a place of peace, calm, and just direct focus.
Mm.
But practice makes perfect.
Yeah. I feel like when I started learning about what you're talking about, Ian, I think I might have said this to you guys in the group. It's when I first started learning actually, I'm going to go back to the title, but it was like I felt the horror, like in terms of like how I felt horrified that I was like, okay, I haven't seen this stuff before. Like the judge kicks in, and then I was telling myself, "Oh, you're stupid, you're this." But again, it's like when you do anything, when you go to the gym, for example, and you work out for the first time, your muscles are hurting, your muscles ache for days after. I kind of feel like it's like a process, and it kind of hurts at the beginning. Like it kind of hurts going through that process, and but you kind of know it's good for you. You know you need to develop these muscles.
Yeah, I would say I would qualify that. You need to if you want certain things, right?
If you want something.
There's no necessarily need or should, but yeah, I'm totally with you. I'm looking at our time. This has been such a good conversation. We still have another 14 minutes. Are there any things we still want to touch on? And I don't know if this is my first LinkedIn Live, folks. And I don't know, is there a way, if there are people listening in, they can put in questions in the chat?
Yeah, they should be able to send some questions in the comments.
Okay, well, feel free to do that if anyone is live with us.
And I just wanted to jump on AK's comment there about how it can hurt. I think when we first become aware of what's going on in our minds, like it can feel like our awareness is activating these like judges and all of that, but we have to be aware that this has happened. It's happening constantly in our minds, and most of the time we're just not aware of it. So the first time we become aware of it, it's just like complete.
Yes.
It can be a little overwhelming, and it's like, oh my god, what's going on there? And that's not so easy at the beginning, and it's influencing us all the time. So I can just not be aware of it. That's a choice too, and just be sort of influenced by it all day long, or I can actually become aware of it and practice a self-command, and then make a choice that I want to act on it or not.
Alisa, that made me think of my avoider saboteur, right? If I know something's there, the lie, and Shirzad talks, each of the saboteurs have a lie. The lie is if I avoid it, I forget what it actually specifically is, but if I avoid it, I'm going to have more enjoyment in life because I'm avoiding that pain, right? But that's a lie, because actually, I think of the opposite of avoiding is facing. It's sort of obvious. But I've found when I face things, and I'm facing a priority that I've been avoiding, and it's not as bad as I thought, it instantly has this release of energy. I'm like, wow, I faced this really what I thought was going to be a difficult conversation, and it went well. It might be uncomfortable, but there was some good that came out of it. Gosh, all these other things I've been avoiding that are easier. Think about, that's back to the energy part of the conversation. That's the potential of this, is how might we repurpose the energy that's being drained out of us from overactive saboteurs to bring back in your thread, Alisa, that saboteurs is somewhat loaded language because our survival brain is a wonderful thing. We need it. But the problem is it being overactive. And so I want to bring in the thought that I was going to mention earlier when we were simul sharing there, Ian. Jim Dethmer, who was one of the leaders of the Conscious Leadership Group, he was sharing on the Knowledge Project podcast recently. Really great episode. And one of the things he talked about was feelings. And so I'm bringing in feelings in here and emotions, as we can avoid those things. Some of us can. And when we avoid, I know I can at times. It's like think of this metaphor. If you're in a lake or some swimming area and you push a beach ball under the water, it wants to push back up, right? It wants to float to the surface. So it takes so much energy to suppress feelings. And he said he works with so many leaders who are doing that. What would happen if we didn't have to, if we were allowed those feelings and emotions to come up and we learn to deal with them?
Mm.
So I love that the energy thread in this conversation. Yeah.
Or you let the air out as well. Easier to go on.
There you go.
Sorry,
Okay.
that's what I thought of. I was just like, let all the pent up pressure out.
Yeah.
Just stop the struggle altogether.
Yeah.
Well, you know, what you shared brings up another interesting question. So one of the things I took from what you shared, David, is this question of like, okay, so let's say you mastered these things, and you had this energy back in your life. What would you do with it?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that question of why and the question of vision is actually so critical in terms of being able to be successful in taking on something like this, or pick any sort of course or program or adventure you go on to better yourself and have a better life. Like, sure, having less stress and being more at peace with yourself and closer to your essence sounds great, but what's actually on the other side of that for you?
Mm-hmm.
I found that in my coaching practice, oftentimes when I'm working with clients, one of the places where they get the most stuck isn't really in that they don't know what their problem is. A lot of times, even if it's not right there at the surface, they already kind of know what their problem is. It's that they don't have a vision of what comes after that that's clear enough, that's juicy enough, that's inspiring enough to make the work worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Mm-hmm.
That, and also sort of like the judge of the problem, because sometimes like that's not even their opinion. Like sometimes it turns out that the problem isn't actually a big problem or a problem at all, but there's a judgment that's maybe not even mine, but something from society, parents, whatever. And so there's like these two things that's coming back to the why. Like, am I just wanting to get rid of this thing because it's frowned upon or whatever? And also, do I have a vision to what do I do instead, right? Like these two elements of that both tie back into the why, I think.
So I think maybe a fun way we could bring this conversation home, and I'll put this out to you guys, is what got me curious is maybe we can each share what's our big why. Got us on this.
I thought we were gonna play a game, Ian, when you said fun, but we can make this into a game.
I'm open to ideas here because for the live studio audience here, David has this incredible and fabulous background in improv comedy, and that's one of the things I've looked forward to the most and enjoy about being in this group is the opportunity to kind of play these games to bring points and ideas home. So, I put out my thought as I'd love to hear from you guys what some of your whys are that you're pointing at right now in your lives. And then maybe we can play a quick game to wrap this up.
Well, I have an idea, Ian. Why don't I yes and your offer, as we would say in improv, and combine the two? So, like, what is our deeper why? And there's that one what Shirzad calls a power game. Do they call it? Sage power game of this yes and, which is a big thing in improv. And so maybe what if someone shared their why and we could say, yes, what I love about that is, right? Something that like, so we're affirming that, and here's mine. Something like that. I'm making this up as I go.
Let's do it.
Who wants to start? Ian?
Sure. My why is I intend to create an experience of life with so much ease and so much joy that I've got a cup that's full enough that I can just keep pouring in other cups around me.
That's awesome, Ian. What I love about that is just that I really believe that the nature of the world, creation, the universe is that of generativity. And because of our over fear in the world, in our scarcity, we've taken that out. So I'm just hearing you saying, like, I've found that, and the generosity just flows from that. And it's very inspiring. And I have a thing from my friend in my kitchen that says my cup overflows. So it made me think of that too. And my why is about, like, I get excited about liberation that's possible. And that joy. Okay, I'm just gonna go straight for this. That's coming up for me. David Whyte, the poet consultant, Whyte. There's one line of his poem that's this: inside everyone is a great shout of joy waiting to be born. And that, I'll just stop there. That resonates with my deeper why. It's like, how might we unlock that great shout of joy, and what would that make possible? What's keeping us from that?
Well, David, what I love about that is just bringing in joy, because also this is one of my sage essences as we were doing the self-empathize game, where we were empathizing with ourselves as a child. Joy was like one of the things that came up. And I think the world needs more joy. And building on that, my why, I'm really excited about the potential of shaping our own evolution in forward, in the way of joy, in the way of freedom, self-realization, individually and collectively. And it starts with me, or with myself. Yeah.
Wow. I love that. What I love about that is, well, just how powerful it is. I think how much value you're going to bring to everybody that comes across you as a person. You've brought value to me 100%. And we haven't even known each other that long. And I think my why is, what's coming up for me now is just to be content mentally, like to calm my mind so that I can best help people that are close to me. Like it's kind of what's coming up now as a thought, as a raw emotion.
Beautiful.
Wonderful. What I love about that, AK, is it reminds me of something I really appreciate about you, is your willingness to share, like on our WhatsApp thread, of just spontaneously what's coming up, and that the world needs more of that too. So thank you.
Well, I think that's a wonderful note to end with. Yeah, and if there are any questions, you know how to reach us here on LinkedIn. Just write us a message. Yeah,
this has been so much fun.
Thanks everyone.
Continuing the conversation.
Yeah, it was really nice.
Lovely.
Right. Have a great evening, everyone. Take care.